Hey everyone, today I'm going to be going over my warrior Joust tier list. I've ranked each warrior according to their kit, not necessarily taking into account any items or maps specifically. I'm filming this on patch 8.10, but like I said, my ratings are based on kit alone, so this tier list should be pretty future-proof. Before we get into my rating system, if you are somebody who comes back and watches my videos often, if you've enjoyed them previously, if they've helped you win Joust games before, consider liking, subscribing, following me on Twitch, leaving a comment. All of those things help me and let me know that my videos are valuable to you. Just like the Guardian Joust tier list, I've given a set of criteria to warriors that I think is valuable and will help you win in Joust game modes. Those criteria are initiation, crowd control, damage, flexibility, survivability, team fight. All of those things are going to add up to a total from 0 to 30. The higher those warriors are on the tier list, the more valuable they are. They can be bans in some cases. The lower warriors are on the tier list. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can't win with them. It just means that it's going to be harder to win, or you're going to need to build a comp around those warriors more specifically to be more successful. So my tiers, I have D 0 to 12, the worst tier. Don't choose these at all. C 13 to 15, harder to win with. B 16 to 18, pretty average, can work in basically any comp. A 19 to 21, better than average, can work in any comp and be more successful. And then S 22 plus. These are the top priority picks for warriors. You can even carry with some of these warriors at certain points. They are just the top tier ones. We're going to be going in alphabetical order, so obviously the first warrior that we'll be ranking is Achilles. Achilles initiation, I gave him a 3 out of 5. His shield stun is a full second, which is pretty good setup for a team. He can dash in and around the front lines if he needs to. And as a last resort, he can also initiate with his ultimate. Not necessarily what you want to do, but he does have a pretty decent ability to initiate fights. Crowd control, he really only has the stun on his shield. It is a second stun, so a pretty decently long stun, but since there really only is one piece of that in his kit, I'm giving him a 2 out of 5 in crowd control. Damage, he is a 5 out of 5. His ability to auto attack, cancel, get into the back line, do damage, pop out, poke, any way you need to deal damage, he's there. Plus the ultimate is a 30% execute, which is just definitely one of the best warrior ultimates to have in Joust. Flexibility, he's 4 out of 5. His passive alone, where he can switch from tank or more damage oriented, gives him a lot of flexibility, so he can flex into almost any sort of role you need him to in Joust. Survivability, he also is a 4 out of 5. His 2 allows him to heal up a ton. He can get out of fights. He has a CC immune ult. He has a stun, and then his dash is really, you can use it to get away from a lot of damage. Team fights, he's a 4 out of 5 as well, mostly due to just the damage output he has. The stun is there for some setup, and then deleting somebody from a team fight with an ultimate in a 3v3 game mode is just pretty stellar. So I gave that a 4 out of 5. That gives Achilles a total of 22 out of 30, which puts our first warrior Achilles into the S tier. He really is one of the best warriors in Joust, and I think he always will be because of his kit. The next warrior we'll be talking about is Amaterasu. Amaterasu, I gave a 3 out of 5 in initiation. She does have a silence into a dash that she can use to initiate fights. The shield does a ton of damage, and the ultimate is obviously a great initiation tool as well. So she does all of those things fairly well, so I gave her a 3 there. Crowd control, she has slows in her kit, she has a silence, and then also a stun on her ultimate, depending on if you can hit one of the first 2 swipes on that ultimate. So she has a decent amount of crowd control as well, which is why I gave her a 3. Amaterasu also gets a 3 out of 5 in damage. Her 2 does a fair amount of damage. Everything else she kind of has to rely on being close, sticking to the enemy and doing auto attack damage, which she does a lot of. But in Joust, with a 3v3 kind of constant fight going on, there's a lot of things that can interrupt her damage, so just pretty average on that front. Flexibility, she's a 1 out of 5. She can't build into a tank build really as much as a lot of other warriors can, and she really does rely on attack speed quite a bit. So she really has one role that she has to play, which is why I gave her a 1 out of 5 in flexibility. Survivability, she gets a 3 out of 5, fairly average again. Has some sustain in her kit, has some movement speed that allows her to get away from certain things that other warriors wouldn't be able to. Team fight, she gets a 3 out of 5, mostly just due to her ultimate alone. One of the best team fight ultimates in the game, but unfortunately, with the rest of Amaterasu's kit in Joust, I feel like that's really one of the only things that she can bring to the team. Since the majority of Amaterasu's kit really does rely on sticking close, doing auto attack damage, and the only real benefit from the rest of her kit is her ultimate, which is fairly telegraphed. I gave her a 16 out of 30, which puts her in the B tier. The next warrior on our list is Bellona. Bellona, I gave a 3 out of 5 for initiation. She does have the shield bash, which can slow. I think her chain whip is actually a fairly underrated tool to initiate if you disarm a hunter and then can jump on them right away. It's a really good initiation tool. And then of course her ultimate, which stuns, is always kind of what she's really known for anyways, and that allows your team to follow up pretty easily. Crowd control, she gets a 3 out of 5. Just like I talked about in that last section, she has a slow, a silence, a disarm, and a stun. All three of those things are very useful in certain situations. Damage, she's a 3 out of 5. She does have to rely on being close to enemies, sort of like Amaterasu, and kind of does rely on more of that basic attack damage, which is harder to do in Joust in my opinion. So I'm gonna give her a 3 there and make it pretty average. Flexibility, she's a 2 out of 5. She really can't peel very well for her teammates, so she can't be that support role. She really does need to build damage. Survivability, she's a 3 out of 5. She has a lot of tools in her kit, protections upon auto attacks. She has disarms, she has block stacks, and then of course her ultimate, which can kind of let her jump out of anything, just makes her a very survivable warrior. Team fight, a 3 out of 5 as well. She can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. She can take the attention away from the other team trying to kill a Bellona when they should just be ignoring her, and then the ultimate having the 1.25 second stun on it and fighting inside of it is just a great team fight ult. Because she does everything just okay and doesn't really excel at anything, I gave her 17 out of 30, which puts her in the B tier. The next god on our warrior list is Chaac. Chaac gets kind of a lot of flack for being a very, very basic character, but I do think he can be effective in Joust. I gave his initiation a 4 out of 5. He can throw his axe a pretty long distance and teleport to it immediately, and then ultimate or slow an enemy to the point of them not even be able to move. So I think he does have a very, very good initiation. I gave him a 4 out of 5. Crowd control, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He really, really relies on slows, but his slows are very, very good slows. So even though it's a basic crowd control, it is a very effective one. And then he also has the silence on his ultimate, which really is one of the best CCs in the game. Damage, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He can do a ton of damage early with his axe, and then he can stick to you very easily on his own just by using the slows. So yeah, I gave him a very average 3 out of 5. Not exceptional, but does enough damage to be effective. Flexibility, I gave him a 2 out of 5. He really has to be that diving, tank, soaking up damage role. He doesn't really do much else outside of that. Survivability, I gave him a 4 out of 5. The heals built into his kit, the self-healing, the ability to get away from a fight using his axe teleport, and then also the silence and knock up on his ultimate all allow him to get away very, very easily from almost any fight. And then his team fight, I gave him a 4 out of 5 as well. The slows are very, very important if you have a low mobility god that you're fighting, an Ares or something like that. And then the team fight ultimate, maybe one of the best, and on a 75-second cooldown, very, very good in Joust. Knockup and silence is just very valuable. So overall, I gave Chaac a 20 out of 30, which puts him in the A tier. The next warrior on our list is Chulainn. I gave him a 4 out of 5 in initiation. He has a leap on his human ability, or his human form, and then he has a dash, I guess I would call it, in his ultimate form that can allow you to get into the backline or get to those squishy targets if you need to. And then he does have tools like a knock up on his first form, his human form, which can also set up pretty easily. Kind of goes into the same crowd control, why I gave him a 4 out of 5 there. He has knock up, he has tremble, he has a root, a stun, a ton of different ways that he can stop the enemy from doing what they need to do and set your own team up to follow up on those fights. A 4 out of 5 in damage as well. Having the ability to rotate through 6 abilities allows him to do a ton of damage in a short amount of time, and he also has that kind of mystical mail effect where damage is always pulsing off of him, so he can get a ton of damage out in team fights. I gave him a 2 out of 5 in flexibility. I don't think he can really be that kind of Guardian-esque warrior that some others can, so he has to be that dive heavy, damage heavy role. Survivability, another 4 out of 5. Again, he has just a ton of tools in his kit that allow him to get out if he needs to. He has anti-heal built in as well, which is very, very valuable in some of those fights. Team fight, I gave him a 4 out of 5. Kind of went over it with every single other criteria here, but because he has a rotation of 6 abilities, it allows him to do so many different things for the team, which is very, very important in Joust. So all of that being said, I gave Chulainn a 22 out of 30. That puts him in the S tier, up by Achilles. I do think Chulainn has a higher skill ceiling and takes a little bit longer to learn, but he can be just as effective in those team fights in Joust. The next warrior up that we have to rate is Erlang Shen. I gave him a 4 out of 5 in initiation. He has a long range root that is pretty effective at pinning down targets from far away. He can knock people up at close range with his turtle, and then his ultimate can be used for a 3-person taunt, which in Joust is very, very effective. Crowd control, for similar reasons, I gave a 4 out of 5. The pin, being a long range route, is definitely super, super valuable. The turtle, when used correctly as a knock-up, can set your teammates up in position. And then a taunt is, again, one of the more powerful crowd controls in all of Smite. I gave Erlang Shen a 3 out of 5 in damage. He does have a lot of damage kind of attached to his basic attacks with the passive of his dog, but you really can't get as much damage off in Joust as you can in other game modes just because of the constant 3v3 action. Flexibility, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He works surprisingly well as that Guardian if you need him to be. You can build him pretty tanky just because he does have a long range CC and a really heavy team fight ult. So he actually can work in a multitude of different roles pretty effectively. Survivability, I gave him a 3 out of 5 as well. He has a ton of healing built into his kit. He has a shell with his turtle, kind of a long-range dash too if he needs to get out of somewhere effectively. So he does have a good degree of survivability. And then team fight, I gave him a 3 out of 5. His kit allows him to set a lot of things up. And just his ultimate alone, if you can hit 1 or 2 people with that and stop them from fighting your teammates, it really does make a giant difference in Joust. So because of all those reasons, I gave him a 20 out of 30, which puts him in the A tier. The next warrior that we'll be rating is Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, I gave a 5 out of 5 in initiation. The first thing that obviously comes to mind is the kick, the knockback, the drop kick, which can put an enemy team, someone from the enemy team completely out of position. It can stun multiple enemies, kick them into a wall, kick them away. You can jump in with the 3, which gives your teammates speed, or you can just use the ultimate as the giant zoning tool that most people use it for. So a ton of initiation tools. Crowd control, also a 4 out of 5. We already talked about the kick, the knockback. He has a slow on his 1. He has a slow into root on his ultimate. So again, a ton of different tools that he can use for crowd control to set his team up. He also has great damage. I gave him a 4 out of 5. He can solo people by himself, even when building a little bit tanky. Probably one of the highest damaging warriors in Joust as well. Flexibility, he has a 4 out of 5. He can fit any role. He does that high burst damage if you need him to. He actually works as a guardian surprisingly well. So he has a lot of flexibility in ways that you can use him in Joust. Survivability, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He doesn't necessarily have an inherently big amount of self-sustain or anything, but the combination of a leap being able to get away, a knockback to kick enemies away, and then the ultimate if you really need it to get away, is another great tool that he can survive with. Team fight, 4 out of 5. Everything in his kit allows him to set his teammates up for success, even get away if they need to. One of the best warrior kits in Joust. I gave Gilgamesh a 24 out of 30, which puts him in the S tier, probably one of the most bannable warriors in Smite. Guan Yu is the next warrior that we're going to be talking about in this tier list. I gave him a 3 out of 5 when it comes to initiation. He does have a short dash that he can use to initiate and has a slow attached to it. The shred can actually be used to initiate fights because you can kind of burst somebody down pretty quickly. And then his ultimate is obviously a very good long range initiation tool as well. So he has a few good tools, which is why I gave him a 3 there. Crowd control, I gave a 3 out of 5. He has that kind of smaller slow on his 2, which is decent crowd control. And then the ultimate, again, going back to that, having the stun at the end of it can really be a great crowd control tool. 4 out of 5 damage, again with the shred on his 3. He can do a ton of damage on his own. And not only that, it can just do more damage across the team because of that shred. Flexibility, he's a 3 out of 5. He can build in a multitude of different ways and be pretty successful. He doesn't necessarily have a ton of peel to fit that guardian support role, but his kit does allow him to kind of flex out of that a little bit. Survivability is a 4 out of 5. Having a built-in team heal in addition to himself and getting more cooldowns from things like that are just pretty insane. Can allow him to dash away, heal, dash away again before getting killed. And then team fight, I also gave him a 4 out of 5. Having that healer aspect as part of his kit as a warrior is very, very rare and can allow your team to fight for a longer period of time than they would be without that. Plus his ultimate is a great ability to just dive and demolish somebody, and deleting somebody from the fight is a great team fight aspect in Joust. So because of those reasons, I gave Guan Yu a 21 out of 30, which puts him in the A tier. The next warrior on our list is Hercules. I gave Hercules a 4 out of 5 when it comes to initiation. He really only does one thing to initiate fights, but that one thing is so good in Joust that I had to rate him pretty highly. If you've ever been on the other end of an Earthbreaker into Driving Strike, you know how much that can actually just completely demolish anything that you're trying to do as a team. So very, very good initiation tool with Hercules. Crowd control, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He has Driving Strike, which is a push into a stun, and then he has Earthbreaker, which is that kind of pluck, Sobek pluck type ability, but outside of that, he doesn't have much. Damage, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He can do a ton of damage, especially over a long sustained fight, but he doesn't have a super high damage output unless he's kind of fed. Flexibility, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He can build in a multitude of different ways and be effective. He can fit different roles. He can't peel that well, and the peel that he has is kind of difficult to hit, so I would stick with more of that tank hybrid build. Survivability, I gave him a 5 out of 5. If you've ever played Hercules, you know he has so much sustain from the healing in his kit. He can stay in those fights forever and heal up and survive, and that really is his biggest strength. Lastly, Hercules team fight, I gave a 3 out of 5. Like I said before, some of the things that he can do are very effective, but it's all very telegraphed, and it's hard to kind of do what you need to do in Joust because people are going to be expecting it. So not a huge score for him on the team fight front, but he is good enough to get things done. All these things put together, Hercules gets a 21 out of 30, which puts him in the A tier for warriors. The next warrior that we will be rating is Horus. Horus, I gave a 3 out of 5 for initiation. He does have that dash into stun and then knock up, which are good tools, but the enemy knows exactly what you're going to be doing, and you are kind of dead in the water sometimes after using those things. But he can start fights fairly effectively, so I gave him a 3 out of 5. Crowd control, I'm giving him a 4 out of 5. Having a knock up that often in any kit is really good for your team. Plus the dash into stun. Both of his crowd controls are up so often that he can use them very effectively in Joust. Damage, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He does a surprising amount of damage early, and then after that it can kind of fall off a little bit if you're not building full damage, but he does enough damage to be effective in Joust, especially as a warrior. Flexibility, he gets a 4 out of 5. Horus was really meant to be kind of that guardian-ish warrior from the beginning, so it does make sense that he can flex into those different roles completely and be very comfortable in either. Survivability, he has a 4 out of 5. He does have healing built into his kit. He can dash to any of his own teammates or minions. And then the ultimate, although not a great survivability tool, if you use it to initiate, you get a shield or you can escape in rare situations. Team fight, I gave him a 2 out of 5. That's just because he does isolate one person very well on the enemy team with his kit, but it really doesn't do that much in a team fight scenario unless you can hit a multiple person knockup. And his ultimate is just too slow to really be that effective. So because of those reasons, I gave him a 20 out of 30, which still puts him in the A tier. The next warrior on our list is King Arthur. King Arthur, I actually gave a 1 out of 5 when it comes to initiation. Outside of pure just damage abilities, it takes a lot for King Arthur to initiate a fight. As soon as the enemy sees you using your 3 at all, they're just going to back off in Joust. You can't really catch them off guard with it, and nobody's going to really box you. So I think he does have a very hard time initiating. Crowd control, I gave him a 2 out of 5. He does have a cripple, a slow, a couple knockups in his kit, and then his ultimate is a good CC ability. But a lot of it is so close range that you can't get them off effectively in Joust. So I gave him a 2 there. Damage, I gave him a 3 out of 5. I think a lot of his damage relies on him being kind of fed from the beginning. And again, Joust is just a game mode where he has a hard time doing the same things that he does in other game modes. Flexibility, I gave him a 2 out of 5. He can't really flex into any other roles other than that big damage sponge and ability mashing god. Survivability, 4 out of 5. He does have a lot of things that allow him to kind of get in and out of the fights if he needs to. Plus a lot of the itemization that he can build just allow him to get a ton of health or things like that just off of him hitting his abilities. So he is a very survivable god. Team fight, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He has that big disruption factor with a lot of what he does. And he kind of takes the attention away from a lot of other gods in team fights specifically. So he does have a pretty good team fight on his hands. However, he just doesn't do quite enough all around. So overall, King Arthur gets a 15 out of our 30, and he is the first warrior in our C tier. The next warrior in our Joust tier list is Mulan. Mulan, I gave a 4 out of 5 in initiation. Her sash alone, her 3, kind of works like a Naja where it pulls the enemy towards you. Is just so good by itself. Pulls one enemy out of position, and it's a very, very effective initiation tool. Her ultimate is also a very, very good initiation tool if you can get it leveled. So 2 very solid initiations for Joust is why I gave her a 4 out of 5. Crowd control, I gave her a 3 out of 5. Similar to initiation, the same crowd control that she has are that pull. Her ultimate has a stun into a knockup. So those 2 things, knockups alone, are one of the best CCs in Smite 2. So I gave her a 3 out of 5 there. Damage, I gave her a 4 out of 5. Early on, she does a very, very surprising amount of damage, and if you can level up her abilities quickly, you can snowball out of control. So I think she's one of the highest damaging early game Joust gods, and that's kind of where you want to be in Joust specifically. Flexibility, she's 3 out of 5. Doesn't have that many tools to flex outside of that kind of hybridish role. Survivability, she has a 3 out of 5. She has built-in heal on her 2. She can pull herself away once the 3 is leveled as well. The ultimate is a okay getaway tool, but you're kind of stuck in place, but you can cancel it now, which is an upgrade from previous kits. Lastly, her team fight is 4 out of 5. Pulling somebody out of position with the 3, stunning the entire team with her ultimate, which can be done fairly easily in Joust. The whole ultimate is about the lane wide, so you can hit all 3 of them very easily. And if you do that, it just sets your team up perfectly. So because of all these reasons, Mulan gets a 21 out of 30, which puts her up in our A tier. The next warrior on our list is Nike. Nike, I gave a 4 out of 5 in initiation. Her Ren does a ton of damage and can go into a disarm if she hits all 3, which is great setup for teammates. Her 3 is a Bacchus jump, essentially, that she can use and is a amazing initiation tool on its own right. And then if she hits her slow on multiple enemies or just one enemy, that can set them up for a great team fight too. Crowd control, she gets a 3 out of 5. Her wall can be used as kind of a zoning tool. She does have a slow on her ultimate, as I stated before, and the knockup is just one of the best initiation and crowd controls in Smite in general. Damage, she gets a 3 out of 5. She does a lot of damage with her rend, but you do have to pretty consistently hit all 3. Otherwise, you're not going to be getting that full damage out of her. Either way, she does good enough damage to give her a 3. Flexibility, she's a 3 out of 5. She can build into that kind of tank build if she needs to. She can fit almost any role you need her to in Joust. So she is a very flexible god. Survivability, I also gave her a 4 out of 5. Her ultimate alone that gives her a giant shield should let her survive from almost anything in Joust, aside from the enemy team coordinating with Sunders. But she also has a jump, which can get her over walls and get her out of precarious situations. Team fight, I gave her a 3 out of 5 overall. She does do a lot of things that contribute to team fights, but nothing exceptionally well. So for that reason, I gave her a 20 out of 30, which puts her in the A tier amongst our warriors. Odin is next up on our Joust tier list. Initiation, I gave Odin a 4 out of 5. He has that leap that can get him over walls and into the enemy backline. Mix that with his ultimate, which locks people in place. They can't leave a giant circle. Just a great initiation, a couple initiation tools mixed in with his 3 that can also stun. Crowd control, I gave him a 2 out of 5. Yes, his ultimate locks people in a specific area, but as far as individual lockdown, the only thing he really has is the stun on his 3. Damage, I gave him a 4 out of 5, whether it's the bird bombs, whether it's just him beating on you while his shield is up. He has a ton of ways to do a lot of damage in short amounts of time, and that's what you really want in Joust. Flexibility, I also gave him a 4 out of 5. He's very, very versatile, can build in many different ways, and you can use him in many different ways. So he is one of the most flexible warriors in Joust. Survivability, also gave him a 4 out of 5. His shield is very, very good in Joust, and it's up, if you get full cooldown, it's up every like 3 seconds or something. So that mixed with being able to jump over walls, being able to wall people in or out with his ultimate if he needs to, just make him a very, very survivable god. And then team fight, a 5 out of 5, mostly just due to his ultimate, right? That's really the reason why people pick him, and it makes him even more valuable in Joust than other game modes because he can pretty easily get the entire enemy team inside of it, which forces them to go specific relics or pick certain gods that may not be ideal just because they have a jump. So because of all these reasons, I gave Odin a 23 out of 30, which puts him up in our S tier. The next god on our warrior Joust tier list is Osiris. Osiris, I gave a 3 out of 5 when it comes to initiation. He does have a slow on his 1 that he can use to kind of single out targets. The 3 isn't a great initiation tool unless you're close enough to enemies, but it can be a great stun that sets up if you really are diving hard. And then his ultimate, he can jump in and initiate fights. It's a little bit harder to hit that, so kind of a higher skill there, but it can happen. Crowd control, he gets a 3 out of 5. He has a ton of slows in his kit, and he can really take advantage of that, but slows in general aren't the strongest crowd control, and he really needs to hit kind of combos to make his crowd control worth it, so I just gave him a 3 there. Damage, I gave him a 4 out of 5. He really can spam damage with his 2. His cooldowns are very, very low just inherently in his kit. And then he does a lot of auto attack damage, which I think is easier for him to pull off than a lot of the other auto attack based warriors. Flexibility, I gave him a 2 out of 5. He really can't be a lone support type character in Joust. You need him to be part of a double tank comp or something to be most effective. Survivability, I gave him a 4 out of 5. His passive that gives him a ton of mitigations and the ability to just walk through walls or through enemies or whatever he needs to is really good. And he has slows that can help him get away and speed himself up. And then the ultimate is kind of a get out of jail free card if you really need it. Team fight, 3 out of 5. He does tend to be that diving heavy warrior that pulls attention away from the team. But outside of that, he doesn't bring a ton to team fights to set your team up for success. He has anti-heal on his ultimate, but that's kind of single target too. So you really have to be smart when you use that. Since all of what Osiris does is effective, but I think is harder to pull off in Joust, he's a slightly not quite that top tier. He's a 19 out of 30, which puts him in A. Sun Wukong is the next warrior that we'll be talking about. I gave him a 3 out of 5 in initiation. He does have pretty good initiation tools. All of the 3s can be used as initiation. It just kind of depends on what you need, whether you want a stun or a knock up, or if you really need to kind of get back somewhere without being interrupted. You can use any of those abilities to initiate fights, along with the ultimate, which isn't as advisable, but you can do that too. Crowd control, he has a stun on his tiger, he has a knockback on his ox, and then he does have a slow that can be applied to an entire team. So pretty good crowd control all around for Sun Wukong. Damage, I give him a 3 out of 5. Again, pretty good damage on all of his abilities, nothing really insane. The Tiger Stun can do a ton of damage in a short amount of time, but pretty average damage across the board, which is why I gave him a 3. Flexibility, I gave him a 3 out of 5. He can flex into other roles pretty effectively. He is just one of those jack of all trades warriors for sure. Survivability is where he really excels. I gave him a 5 out of 5. His ultimate is really one of the best survivability ultimates in the entire game. You can almost never die with Sun Wukong if you're playing that ultimate correctly. That plus the bird that you can get away with, he can survive almost anything. Team fight, I gave him a 3 out of 5, just because he does have some flexibility with his 3, whether it's knocking enemies back, whether it's stunning a single enemy to kind of eliminate them from the fight, or whether it's ulting in and having your clone kind of do a lot of work for you, whether it's under tower or at specific objectives. He just has a lot of tools that can allow him to be very versatile in team fight scenarios. So I gave him a 3 out of 5 there. All of these things put together make Sun Wukong very good and give him a total of 20 out of 30, which puts him in the A tier. The next god on our Joust tier list is Tyr himself. I gave Tyr a 3 out of 5 in initiation. He can get in to the team fight pretty easily with his Fearless in either stance. But aside from that, he kind of has a hard time starting fights unless he uses ultimate, which you don't want to be using that too often to do that in Joust. Crowd control, he gets a 3 out of 5. Fearless, the knock back into knock up, is kind of one of the signature combos in Smite, but in Joust specifically, it's kind of harder to hit because the enemy knows to expect it. Damage, he gets a 3 out of 5. He can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time in certain scenarios, but he really doesn't do any sort of insane amount of damage that kind of jumps off the charts. Flexibility, I gave him a 3 out of 5 as well. He has a lot of different builds that he can use to go into and be effective, and he can almost be that warrior support that works very well. But I don't know, it's not a great way to build him, so I just gave him a 3 for flexibility. Survivability, I gave him a 4 out of 5. He has a lot of built-in self-heal in his kit, along with kind of 2 dash abilities that allow him to get out of fights if he really needs it, and to get out of jail free ultimate like a lot of other warriors too. Team fight, I gave him a 2 out of 5. If you hit his Fearless knockback into knock up, that can set the tone for a team fight, But if you miss that, you're kind of useless in a team fight scenario for a lot of reasons. So for that reason, I gave him a 2 there. That means that in total, Tyr gets 18 out of 30, which puts him in the B tier. The last warrior on our list is Vamana. Vamana, I gave a 2 out of 5 for initiation. He can umbrella into a team pretty easily, but after that, there's not much that he can do to set up giant team fights. He can umbrella rang and kind of slow 1 or 2 enemies, but he's really just kind of that damage heavy warrior, not much initiation. Same thing with crowd control. He has the slow on the umbrella. Any other sort of crowd control is going to come from items. Knock up on the 1, the dash 2 is okay, but harder to hit, kind of has a large radius, so I just gave him a 2 out of 5 in crowd control. Damage, he has a 3 out of 5. He does do a lot of damage. His 2 is an ability with a lot of damage built in, and then obviously his ultimate is kind of where he gets most of his damage off, but most people expect it and can get away from it, so that's why I gave it a 3. Flexibility, I gave him a 2. He can't really be any sort of full support build. He just doesn't have the kit for it. Survivability, however, he gets a 4 out of 5. His ultimate, where he can heal up, is very, very good. Countered by specific items for sure, but outside of that, he can survive fights for a very long time, and if he really needs to, he can just dash out with his umbrella. Team fight, 2 out of 5. Nothing he really does is going to set up his teammates. He can be a very big disruptor with his ultimate, but it's just kind of a selfish ultimate and doesn't really bring much to the rest of the team. So because of all of these scores, Vamana gets a 15 out of 30. He's one of the lower ranked warriors on our entire list, and he is a C when it comes to the tier list itself. So that's it. That's the entire Joust Warrior tier list. As you can see, it's pretty top heavy. I think that's just because Warriors inherently, their kits have a lot of damage and a lot of CC and a lot of sustain built in just to a lot of what they do. And that's just very valuable in the Joust game mode. So if you're looking for kind of a standard go-to class in Joust that will always be pretty good, you can look to the Warriors. None of these picks are bad in themselves, and a lot of them can just win you the game by themselves if you have to play them. So hopefully you guys found that interesting, found it useful, and can kind of use it to choose your warriors more effectively. I will have the scoring sheet in the description below, so you can check that out if you want to, and the tier list itself will be in the description below if you want to look at that specifically too. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you guys next time.